Thank you for returning for chapters 6 through 10 of E. Doc Smith's classic novel, The Skylark of Space. Be sure to hit like and subscribe so you can be notified of new content on Sci-Fi Classics. Now for the story. Chapter 6, The Object Compass at Work. Prescott, after a sleepless night, joined Seaton and Crane at breakfast. "What do you make of it, Mr. Prescott?" asked Crane. "Seaton here thinks it was Duquesne possibly acting for some foreign power after our flying machine to use in war. I think it was some big industrial concern after our power plant. What is your opinion?" "I haven't any," replied the great detective after a moment. "Either guess may be true, although I am almost positive that Dr. Duquesne had nothing to do with it. Either way, it was no ordinary burglary, that is certain from Shiro's story. It was done by someone who had exact information of your movements and habits. He chose a time when you were away, probably not so much from fear of you as because it was only in your absence that he could succeed as he did in getting all the guards out at once where he could handle them. He was a man with one accomplice or who worked alone, and who was almost exactly Seaton's size and build. He was undoubtedly an expert, as he blew the safe and searched the whole house without leaving a fingerprint or any other clue, however slight that I can find, a thing I have never before seen done in all my experience." "His size should help in locating him," declared Crane. "While there are undoubtedly thousands of men of Dick's 6 feet 1 2/5, they are fairly well scattered, are they not?" "Yes, they are, but his very size only makes it worse. I have gone over all the records I could in the short time I have had, and can't find an expert of that class with anywhere near that description." "How about the third guard, the one who escaped?" asked Seaton. "He wasn't here. It was his afternoon off, you know, and he said that he wouldn't come back into this job on a bet, that he wasn't afraid of anything ordinary, but he didn't like the looks of things out here. That sounded fishy to me, and I fired him. He may have been the leak, of course, though I have always found him reliable before. If he did leak, he must have got a whale of a slice for it. He is under constant watch, and if we can ever get anything on him, I will nail him to the cross. But that doesn't help get this affair straightened out. I haven't given up, of course. There are lots of things not tried yet, but I must admit that temporarily at least I am up a stump." "Well," remarked Seaton, "that $1 million reward will bring him in, sure. No honor that ever existed among thieves or even among free lances of diplomacy could stand that strain." "I'm not so sure of that, Dick," said Crane. "If either one of our ideas is the right one, very few men would know enough about the affair to give pertinent information, and they probably would not live long enough to enjoy the reward very thoroughly. Even $1 million fails in that case. I rather agree with Mr. Crane, Seaton. If it were an ordinary affair, and I am as sure it is not as the police are that it is, a reward of that size would get us our man within 2 days. As it is, I doubt very much that the reward will do us any good. I'm afraid that it will never be claimed. Wonder if the Secret Service could help us out? They'd be interested if it should turn out to be some foreign power. I took it up with the chief himself just after it happened last night. He doesn't think that it can be a foreign country. He has their agents pretty well spotted, and the only one that could fill the bill, you know, a man with that description and with the cold nerve to do the job would be apt to be known, was in San Francisco the time this job was pulled off." "The more you talk, the more I am convinced that it was Duquesne himself," declared Seaton positively. "He is almost exactly my size and build, is the only man I know of who could do anything with the solution after he got it, and he has nerve enough to do anything." "I would like to think it was Duquesne," replied the detective thoughtfully, "but I'm afraid we'll have to count him out of it entirely. He has been under the constant surveillance of my best men ever since you mentioned him. We have detectophones in his rooms, wires on his telephone, and are watching him night and day. He never goes out except to work, never has any except unimportant telephone calls, and the instruments register only the occasional scratching of a match, the rustle of papers, and other noises of a man studying. He's innocent." "That may be true," assented Seaton doubtfully, But you want to remember that he knows more about electricity than the guy that invented it, and I'm not sure that he can't talk to a detector phone and make it say anything he wants it to. Anyway, we can soon settle it. Yesterday I made a special trip down to the bureau, with some notes as an excuse, to set this object compass on him, taking one of the small instruments from his pocket as he spoke. I watched him a while last night, then fixed an alarm to wake me if the needle moved much, but it pointed steady all night. See, it's moving now. That means that he is going to work early, as usual. Now I'm morally certain that he's mixed up in this thing somewhere, and I'm not convinced that he isn't slipping one over on your men some way. He's a clever devil. I wonder if you wouldn't take this compass and watch him yourself tonight, just on general principles? Or let me do it. I'd be glad to. I say tonight, because if he did get the stuff here, he didn't deliver it anywhere last night. It's just a chance, of course, but he may do it tonight. After the compass had been explained to the detective, he gladly consented to the plan, declaring that he would willingly spend the time just to watch such an unheard-of instrument work. After another hour of fruitless discussion, Prescott took his leave, saying that he would mount an impregnable guard from that time on. Late that evening, Prescott joined the two men who were watching Duquesne's house. They reported that all was perfectly quiet as usual. The scientist was in his library, the instruments registering only the usual occasional faint sounds of a man absorbed in study. But after an hour of waiting, and while the microphones made a noise as of rustling papers, the needle of the compass moved. It dipped slowly toward the earth, as though Duquesne were descending into the cellar. But at the same time, the shadow of his unmistakable profile was thrown upon the window shade as he apparently crossed the room. "Can't you hear him walk?" demanded Prescott. "No, he has heavy Turkish rugs all over the library, and he always walks very lightly. Besides—" Prescott watched the needle in amazement as it dipped deeper and deeper, pointing down into the earth almost under his feet and then behind him, as though Duquesne had walked beneath him. He could not believe it. He was certain that something had gone wrong with the strange instrument in his hand. Nevertheless, he followed the pointing needle. It led him beside Park Road, down the hill, straight toward the long bridge which forms one entrance to Rock Creek Park. Though skeptical, Prescott took no chances, and as he approached the bridge, he left the road and concealed himself behind a clump of trees, from which point of vantage he could see the ground beneath the bridge as well as the roadway. Soon the bridge trembled under the weight of a heavy automobile going toward the city at a high rate of speed. He saw Duquesne, with a roll of papers under his arm, emerge from under the bridge just in time to leap aboard the automobile, which slowed down only enough to enable him to board it in safety. The detective noticed that the car was a Pierce Arrow limousine, a car not common even in Washington, and rushed out to get its number. But the license plates were so smeared with oil and dust that the numbers could not be read by the light of the tail lamp. Glancing at the compass in his hand, he saw that the delicate needle was now pointing steadily at the fleeing car, and all doubts as to the power of the instrument were dispelled. He rejoined his men, informed them that Duquesne had eluded them, and took one of them up the hill to a nearby garage. There he engaged a fast car and set out in pursuit, choosing the path for the chauffeur by means of the compass. His search ended at the residence of Brookings, the general manager of the Great World Steel Corporation. Here he dismissed the car and watched the house while his assistant went to bring out the fast motorcycle used by Prescott when high speed was desirable. After 4 hours, a small car bearing the license number of a distant state, which was found by subsequent telegraphing to be unknown to the authorities of that state, drove under the porte cochere, and the hidden watcher saw Duquesne, without the papers, step into it. Knowing now what to expect, Prescott drove his racing motorcycle at full speed out to the Park Road Bridge and concealed himself beneath the structure, in a position commanding a view of the concrete abutment through which the scientist must have come. Soon he heard a car slow down overhead, heard a few rapid footfalls, and saw the dark form of a large man outlined against the grey face of the abutment. He saw the man lift his hand high above his head, and saw a black rectangle appear in the grey, engulf the man and disappear. After a few minutes, he approached the abutment and searched its face with the help of his flashlight. He finally succeeded in tracing the almost imperceptible crack which outlined the door and the concealed button which Duquesne had pressed to open it. He did not press the button, as it might be connected to an alarm. Deep in thought, he mounted his motorcycle and made his way to his home to get a few hours of sleep before reporting to Crane, whom he was scheduled to see at breakfast next morning. Both men were waiting for him when he appeared, and he noticed with pleasure that Shiro, with a heavily bandaged head, was insisting that he was perfectly able to wait on the table instead of breakfasting in bed. He calmly proceeded to serve breakfast in spite of Crane's remonstrances, having ceremoniously ordered out of the kitchen the coloured man who had been secured to take his place. "Well, gentlemen," the detective began, "part of the mystery is straightened out. I was entirely wrong, and each of you were partly right. It was Duquesne in all probability. It is equally probable that a great company, in this case the World Steel Corporation, is backing him, though I don't believe there is a ghost of a show of ever being able to prove it in law. Your object compass did the trick." He narrated all the events of the previous night. "I'd like to send him to the chair for this job," said Seaton with rising anger. "We ought to shoot him anyway, damn him! I'm sorry duels have gone out of fashion, for I can't shoot him off-hand the way things are now. I sure wish I could." "No, you cannot shoot him," said Crane thoughtfully, "and neither can I. Worse luck. We are not in his class there, and you must not fight with him either." Noting that Seaton's powerful hands had doubled into fists, the knuckles showing white through the tanned skin, "Though that would be a fight worth watching, and I would like to see you give him the beating of his life. A little thing like a beating is not a fraction of what he deserves, and it would show him that we have found him out. No, we must do it legally, or let him entirely alone. You think there is no hope of proving it, Prescott?" "Frankly, I see very little chance of it. There is always hope, of course, and if that bunch of pirates ever makes a slip, we'll be right there waiting to catch 'em. While I don't believe in holding out false encouragement, they've never slipped yet. I'll take my men off Duquesne now that we've linked him up with Steele. It doesn't make any difference, does it, whether he goes to them every night or only once a week? No. Then about all I can do is to get everything I can on that Steele crowd, and that is very much like trying to get blood out of a turnip. I intend to keep after them, of course, for I owe them something for killing 2 of my men here, as well as for other favors they have done me in the past, but don't expect too much. I have tackled them before, and so have police headquarters and even the Secret Service itself under cover, and all that any of us has been able to get is an occasional small fish. We could never land the big fellows. In fact, we have never found the slightest material proof of what we are morally certain is the truth, that World Steel is back of a lot of deviltry all over the country. The little fellows who do the work either don't know anything or are afraid to tell. I'll see if I can find out what they're doing with the stuff they stole, but I'm not even sure of doing that. You can't plant instruments on that bunch. It would be like trying to stick a pin into a sleeping cat without waking him up. They undoubtedly have one of the best corps of detectives in the world. You haven't perfected an instrument which enables you to see into a closed room and hear what is going on there, have you?" And upon being assured that they had not, he took his leave. "Optimistic cuss, ain't he?" remarked Seaton. "He has cause to be, Dick. World Steel is a soulless corporation, if there ever was one. They have the shrewdest lawyers in the country, and they get away legally with things that are flagrantly illegal, such as freezing out competitors, stealing patents, and the like. Report has it that they do not stop at arson, treason, or murder to attain their ends, but as Prescott said, they never leave any legal proof behind them." "Well, we should fret anyway. Of course, a monopoly is what they're after, but they can't form one because they can't possibly get the rest of our solution. Even if they should get it, we can get more. It won't be as easy as this last batch was, since the X was undoubtedly present in some particular lot of platinum in extraordinary quantities. But now that I know exactly what to look for, I can find more. So they can't get their monopoly unless they kill us off. Exactly. Go on. I see you are getting the idea. If we should both conveniently die, they could get the solution from the company and have the monopoly, since no one else can handle it. But they couldn't get away with it, Mart. Never in 1,000 years, even if they wanted to. Of course I am small fry, but you are too big a man for even steel to do away with. It can't be done. I am not so sure of that. Airplane accidents are numerous, and I am an aviator. Also, has it ever occurred to you that the heavy forging for the Skylark ordered a while ago are of steel? Seaton paused, dumbfounded, in the act of lighting his pipe. But thanks to your object compass, we are warned, Crane continued evenly. Those forgings are going through the most complete set of tests known to the industry, and if they go into the Skylark at all, it will be after I am thoroughly convinced that they will not give way on our first trip into space. But we can do nothing until the steel arrives, and with the guard Prescott has here now, we are safe enough. Luckily, the enemy knows nothing of the object compass or the explosive, and we must keep them in ignorance. Hereinafter, not even the guards get a look at anything we do. They sure don't. Let's get busy. De Queen and Brookings met in conference in a private room of the Perkins Cafe. What's the good word, Doctor? So-so, replied the scientist. The stuff is all they said it was, but we haven't enough of it to build much of a power plant. We can't go ahead with it anyway, as long as Seaton and Crane have nearly all their original solution. No, we can't. We must find a way of getting it. I see now that we should have done as you suggested, and taken it before they had warning and put it out of our reach. There's no use holding post-mortems. We've got to get it, some way, and everybody that knows anything about that new metal, how to get it or how to handle it, must die. At first, it would have been enough to kill Seaton. Now, however, there is no doubt that Crane knows all about it, and he probably has left complete instructions in case he gets killed in an accident. He's the kind that would, We will have to keep our eyes open and wipe out those instructions and anyone who has seen them. You see that, don't you? Yes, I am afraid that is the only way out. We must have the monopoly, and anyone who might be able to interfere with it must be removed. How has your search for more X prospered? About as well as I expected. We bought up all the platinum wastes we could get and reworked all the metallic platinum and allied metals we could buy in the open market, and got less than a gram of X out of the whole lot. It's scarcer than radium. Seaton's finding so much of it at once was an accident, pure and simple. It couldn't happen once in 1,000,000 years. Well, have you any suggestions as to how we can get that solution? No, I haven't thought of anything but that very thing ever since I found that they had hidden it, and I can't yet see any good way of getting it. My forte is direct action, and that fails in this case, since no amount of force or torture could make Crane reveal the hiding place of the solution. It's probably in the safest safe deposit vault in the country. He wouldn't carry the key on him, probably wouldn't have it in the house. Killing Seaton or Crane, or both of them, is easy enough, but it probably wouldn't get us the solution, as I have no doubt that Crane has provided for everything. Probably he has. But if he should disappear, the stuff would have to come to light, or the Seaton Crane Company might start their power plant. In that case, we probably could get it. Possibly, you mean? That method is too slow to suit me, though. It would take months, perhaps years, and would be devilishly uncertain. To boot, they'll know something is in the wind, and the stuff will be surrounded by every safeguard they can think of. There must be some better way than that, but I haven't been able to think of it. Neither have I, but your phrase, direct action, gives me an idea. You say that method has failed. What do you think of trying indirect action in the shape of Perkins, who is indirection personified? Bring him in. He may be able to figure out something. Perkins was called in and the main phases of the situation laid before him. The three men sat in silence for many minutes while the crafty strategist studied the problem. Finally he spoke. "There's only one way, gentlemen. We must get a handle on either Seaton or Crane strong enough to make them give up their bottle of dope, their plans, and everything." "Handle," interrupted Duquesne. "You talk like a fool. You can't get anything on either of them." "You misunderstand me. Doctor, you can get a handle of some kind on any living man. Not necessarily in his past, you understand. I know that anything like that is out of the question in this case, but in his future. With some men it is money, with others power, with others fame, with others women or some woman, and so on down the list. What can we use here? Money is out of the question, so are power and fame, as they already have both in plain sight. It seems to me that women would be our best chance." "Ha!" snorted the chemist. "Crane has been chased by all the women of 3 continents so long that he's woman-proof. Seaton is worse. He's engaged and wouldn't realize that a woman was on his trail, even if you could find a better-looking one to work on him than the girl he's engaged to, which would be a hard job. Cleopatra herself couldn't swing that order. Engaged, that makes it simple as ABC. Simple? In the devil's name, how? Easy as falling off a log. You have enough of the dope to build a space car from those plans, haven't you?" "Yes. What has that to do with the case?" "It has everything to do with it. I would suggest that we build such a car and use it to carry off the girl. After we have her safe, we could tell Seaton that she is marooned on some distant planet and that she will be returned to Earth only after all the solution, all notes, plans, and everything pertaining to the new metal are surrendered. That will bring him, and Crane will consent. Then, afterward, Dr. Seaton may go away indefinitely, and if desirable, Mr. Crane may accompany him." "But suppose they try to fight?" asked Brookings. Perkins slid down into his chair in deep thought, his pale eyes under half-closed lids darting here and there, his stubby fingers worrying his watch-chain restlessly. "Who is the girl?" he asked at last. "Dorothy Vanneman, the daughter of the lawyer. She's that auburn-haired beauty that the papers were so full of when she came out last year." Vanneman is a director in the Seaton Crane Company. That makes it still better. If they show fight and follow us, that beautiful car we are making for them will collapse and they will be out of the way. Vanneman, as Seaton's prospective father-in-law and a member of his company, probably knows something about the secret. Maybe all of it. With his daughter in a space car, supposedly out in space, and Seaton and Crane out of the way, Vanneman would listen to reason and let go of the solution, particularly as nobody knows much about it except Seaton and Crane. "That strikes me as a perfectly feasible plan," said Brookings. "But you wouldn't really take her to another planet, would you? Why not use an automobile or an airplane and tell Seaton that it was a space car?" "I wouldn't advise that. He might not believe it, and they might make a lot of trouble. It must be a real space car, even if we don't take her out of the city. To make it more impressive, you should take her in plain sight of Seaton. No, that would be too dangerous, as I have found out from the police that Seaton has a permit to carry arms, and I know that he is one of the fastest men with a pistol in the whole country. Do it in plain sight of her folks, say, or a crowd of people, being masked, of course, or dressed in an aviator's suit with the hood and goggles on. Take her straight up out of sight, then hide her somewhere until Seaton listens to reason. I know that he will listen, but if he doesn't, you might let him see you start out to visit her. He'll be sure to follow you in their rotten car. As soon as he does that, he's our meat. But that raises the question of who is going to drive the car." "I am," replied Duquesne. "I will need some help, though, as at least one man must stay with the girl while I bring the car back. We don't want to let anybody else in on this if we can help it," cautioned Brookings. "You could go along, couldn't you, Perkins?" "Is it safe?" "Absolutely," answered Duquesne. "They have everything worked out to the Queen's taste." "That's all right, then. I'll take the trip. Also," turning to Brookings, "it will help in another little thing we are doing, the Spencer affair." "Haven't you got that stuff away from her yet, after having had her locked up in that hellhole for 2 months?" asked Brookings. "No, She's stubborn as a mule. We've given her the 3rd degree time after time, but it's no use." "What's this?" asked de Queen. "Deviltry in the main office?" "Yes, this Margaret Spencer claims that we swindled her father out of an invention and indirectly caused his death. She secured a position with us in search of evidence. She is an expert stenographer and showed such ability that she was promoted until she became my secretary. Our detectives must have been asleep, as she made away with some photographs and drawings before they caught her. She has no real evidence, of course, but she might cause trouble with a jury, especially as she is one of the best-looking women in Washington. Perkins is holding her until she returns the stolen articles." "Why can't you kill her off?" "She cannot be disposed of until after we know where the stuff is, because she says, and Perkins believes, that the evidence will show up in her effects. We must do something about her soon, as the search for her is dying down and she will be given up for dead." "What's the idea about her and the space car?" "If the car proves reliable, we might actually take her out into space and give her the choice between telling and walking back. She has nerve enough here on Earth to die before giving up, but I don't believe any human being would be game to go it alone on a strange world. She'd wilt." "I believe you're right, Perkins. Your suggestions are the best way out. Don't you think so, Doctor?" "Yes, I don't see how we can fail. We're sure to win either way. You are prepared for trouble afterward, of course?" "Certainly, but I don't think there will be much trouble. They can't possibly link the 3 of us together. They aren't wise to you, are they, Doctor?" "Not a chance," sneered de Queen. "They ran themselves ragged trying to get something on me, but they couldn't do it. They have given me up as a bad job. I am still as careful as ever, though. I am merely a pure scientist in the Bureau of Chemistry." All 3 laughed, and Perkins left the room. The talk then turned to the construction of the space car. It was decided to rush the work on it so that de Queen could familiarize himself with its operation, but not to take any steps in the actual abduction until such time as Seaton and Crane were nearly ready to take their first flight, so that they could pursue the abductors in case Seaton was still obdurate after a few days of his fiancée's absence. de Queen insisted that the car should mount a couple of heavy guns to destroy the pursuing car if the faulty members should happen to hold together long enough to carry it out into space. After a long discussion, in which every detail of the plan was carefully considered, the 2 men left the restaurant by different exits. Chapter 7. The Voyage. The great steel forgings, which were to form the framework of the Skylark, finally arrived and were hauled into the testing shed. There, behind closed doors, Crane inspected every square inch of the massive members with a lens, but could find nothing wrong. Still unsatisfied, he fitted up an electrical testing apparatus in order to search out flaws which might be hidden beneath the surface. This device revealed flaws in every piece, and after thoroughly testing each one and mapping out the imperfections, he turned to Seaton with a grave face. "Worse than useless, every one of them. They are barely strong enough to stand shipment. They figured that we would go slowly until we were well out of the atmosphere, then put on power, then something would give way and we would never come back. That's about the right dope, I guess. But now what'll we do? We can't cancel without letting them know we're onto them, and we certainly can't use this stuff. No, we will go ahead and build this ship anyway, so that they will think that we are going ahead with it. At the same time, we will build another one, about 4 times this size, in absolute secrecy, and—" "What do you mean? Absolute secrecy? How can you keep steel castings and forgings of that size secret from steel?" "I know a chap who owns and operates a small steel plant, so insignificant relatively that he has not yet been bought out or frozen out by steel. I was able to do him a small favor once, and I am sure that he will be glad to return it. We will not be able to oversee the work. That is a drawback. We can get MacDougall to do it for us, however, and with him doing the work, we can rest assured that there will be nothing off color. Even steel couldn't buy him." "MacDougall? The man who installed the intercontinental plant? He wouldn't touch a little job like this with a pole." I think he would. He and I are rather friendly, and after I tell him all about it, he will be glad to take it. It means building the first interplanetary vessel, you know. Wouldn't Steele follow him up if he should go to work on a mysterious project he's too big to hide? No. He will go camping, he often does. I have gone with him several times when we were completely out of touch with civilization for 2 months at a time. Now, about the ship we want, have you any ideas? It will cost more than our entire capital. That is easily arranged. We do not care how much it costs. Seaton began to object to drawing so heavily upon the resources of his friend, but was promptly silenced. I told you when we started, Crane said flatly, that your solution and your idea are worth far more than $500,000. In fact, they are worth more than everything I have. No more talk of the money end of it, Dick. All right, we'll build a regular go-getter. 4 times the size. She'll be a bear-cat, Mart. I'm glad this one is on the fritz. She'll carry a 200-pound bar. Zoe, watch our smoke! And say, why wouldn't it be a good idea to build an attractor, a thing like an objectbus, but mounting a 10-pound bar instead of a needle, so that if they chase us in space, we can reach out and grab 'em. We might mount a machine gun in each quadrant, shooting explosive bullets through pressure gaskets in the walls. We should have something for defense. I don't like the possibility of having that gang of pirates after us, and nothing to fight back with except thought waves. Right, we will do both those things. But we should make the power plant big enough to avert any possible contingency, say 400 pounds, and we should have everything in duplicate, from power plant to push buttons. I don't think that's necessary, Mart. Don't you think that's carrying caution to extremes? Possibly, but I would rather be a live coward than a dead hero, wouldn't you? You chirped it, old scout. I sure would. I never did like the looks of that old guy with the scythe, and I would hate to let Duquesne feel that he had slipped something over on me at my own game. Besides, I've developed a lot of caution myself lately. Double she is, with a skin of 4-foot Norwegian armor. Let's get busy! They made the necessary alteration in the plans, and in a few days work was begun upon the huge steel shell in the little mountain steel plant. The work was done under the constant supervision of the great MacDougall by men who had been in his employ for years and who were all above suspicion. While it was being built, Seaton and Crane employed a force of men and went ahead with the construction of the space car in the testing shed. While they did not openly slight the work, nearly all their time was spent in the house perfecting the many essential things which were to go into the real Skylark. There was the attractor, for which they had to perfect a special sighting apparatus so that it could act in any direction, and yet would not focus upon the ship itself nor anything it contained. There were many other things. It was in this work that the strikingly different temperaments and abilities of the 2 men were most clearly revealed. Seaton strode up and down the room, puffing great volumes of smoke from his hot and reeking briar, suggesting methods and ideas, his keen mind finding the way over, around, or through the apparently insuperable obstacles which beset their path. Crane, seated calmly at the drafting table, occasionally inhaling a mouthful of smoke from one of his specially made cigarettes, mercilessly tore Seaton's suggestions to shreds, pointing out their weaknesses, proving his points with his cold, incisive reasoning and his slide rule calculations of factors, stresses, and strains. Seaton, in turn, would find a remedy for every defect, and finally, the idea complete and perfect, Crane would impale it upon the point of his drafting pencil and spread it in every detail upon the paper before him, while Seaton's active mind leaped to the next problem. Not being vitally interested in the thing being built in the shed, they did not know that to the flawed members were being attached faulty plates by imperfect welding. Even if they had been interested, they could not have found the poor workmanship by any ordinary inspection, for it was being done by a picked crew of experts picked by Perkins. But to make things even, Perkins's crew did not know that the peculiar instruments installed by Seaton and Crane, of which their foreman took many photographs, were not real instruments, and were made only nearly enough like them to pass inspection. They were utterly useless in design and function, far different from the real instruments intended for the Skylark. Finally, the last dummy instrument was installed in the worthless space car, which the friends referred to between themselves as the Cripple, a name which Seaton soon changed to Old Crip. The construction crew was dismissed after Crane had let the foreman overhear a talk between Seaton and himself, in which they decided not to start for a few days, as they had some final experiments to make. Prescott reported that Steele had relaxed its vigilance and was apparently waiting for the first flight. About the same time, word was received from McDougall that the real Skylark was ready for the finishing touches. A huge triplane descended upon Crane Field and was loaded to its capacity with strange-looking equipment. When it left, Seaton and Crane went with it to make the final tests before the first flight, leaving a heavy guard over the house and the testing shed. A few nights later, in inky blackness, a huge shape descended rapidly in front of the shed, whose ponderous doors opened to receive it and closed quickly after it. The Skylark moved lightly and easily as a wafted feather, betraying its thousands of tons of weight only by the hole it made in the hard-beaten earth of the floor as it settled to rest. Opening one of the heavy doors, Seaton and Crane sprang out into the darkness. Dorothy and her father, who had been informed that the Skylark was to be brought home that night, were waiting. Seaton caught up his sweetheart in one mighty arm and extended his hand past her to Vanneman, who seized it in both his own. Upon the young man's face was the look of a victorious king returning from conquest. For a few minutes, disconnected exclamations were all that any of the party could utter. Then Seaton, loosening slightly his bear's hold upon Dorothy, spoke. "She flies!" he cried exultantly. "She flies, dearest, like a ray of light for speed, and like a bit of thistledown for lightness. We've been around the moon!" "Around the moon!" cried the two amazed visitors. "So soon?" asked Vanneman. "When did you start?" "Almost an hour ago," replied Crane readily. He had already taken out his watch. His voice was calm, his face quiet, but to those who knew him best, a deeper resonance in his voice and a deeper blue sparkle in his eyes betrayed his emotion. Both inventors were moved more than they could have told by their achievement, by the complete success of the great space cruiser upon which they had labored for months with all the power of their marvelous intellects. Seaton stood now at the summit of his pride. No recognition by the masses, no applause by the multitudes, no praise even from the upper 10 of his own profession could equal for him the silent adulation of the two before him. Dorothy's exquisite face was glorified as she looked at her lover. Her eyes were wonderful as they told him how high he stood above all others in her world, how much she loved him. Seeing that look, that sweet face, more beautiful than ever in this, his hour of triumph, that perfect, adorable body, Seaton forgot the others, and a more profound exaltation than that brought by his flight filled his being. Humble thankfulness that he was the man to receive the untold treasure of her great giving. "Every bit of mechanism we had occasion to use worked perfectly," Crane stated proudly. "We did not find it necessary to change any of our apparatus, and we hope to make a longer flight soon. The hour we took on this trip might easily have been only a few minutes, for the Lark did not even begin to pick up speed." Shiro looked at Crane with an air of utter devotion and bowed until his head approached the floor. "Sir," he said in his stilted English, "Honourable Skylark shall be marvellous wonder. If permitting, I shall luxuriate in preparing suitable refreshment." The permission granted, he trotted away into the house, and the travellers invited their visitors to inspect the new craft. Crane and the older man climbed through the circular doorway, which was at an elevation of several feet above the ground. Seaton and Dorothy exchanged a brief but enthusiastic caress before he lifted her lightly up to the opening and followed her up a short flight of stairs. Although she knew what to expect, from her lover's descriptions and from her own knowledge of Old Crip, which she had seen many times, she caught her breath in amazement as she stood up and looked about the brilliantly lit interior of the great sky rover. It was a sight such as had never before been seen upon Earth. Illustration: in the exact center of the huge shell was a spherical network of enormous steel beams. Inside this structure could be seen a similar network which, mounted upon universal bearings, was free to revolve in any direction. She saw a spherical shell of hardened steel armor plate, fully 40 feet in diameter. Though its true shape was not readily apparent from the inside, as it was divided into several compartments by horizontal floors or decks. In the exact center of the huge shell was a spherical network of enormous steel beams. Inside this structure could be seen a similar network which, mounted upon universal bearings, was free to revolve in any direction. This inner network was filled with machinery surrounding a shining copper cylinder. From the outer network radiated 6 mighty supporting columns. These, branching as they neared the hull of the vessel, supported the power plant and steering apparatus in the center, and so strengthened the shell that the whole structure was nearly as strong as a solid steel ball. She noticed that the floor, perhaps 8 feet below the center, was heavily upholstered in leather and did not seem solid, and that the same was true of the dozen or more seats — she could not call them chairs — which were built in various places. She gazed with interest at the 2 instrument boards, upon which flashed tiny lights and the highly polished plate glass, condensite, and metal of many instruments, the use of which she could not guess. After a few minutes of silence, both visitors began to ask questions, and Seaton showed them the principal features of the novel craft. Crane accompanied them in silence, enjoying their pleasure, glorying in the mighty vessel. Seaton called attention to the great size and strength of the lateral supporting columns, one of which was immediately above their heads, and then led them over to the vertical column which pierced the middle of the floor. Enormous as the lateral had seemed, it appeared puny in comparison with this monster of fabricated steel. Seaton explained that the 2 verticals were many times stronger than the 4 laterals, as the center of gravity of the ship had been made lower than its geometrical center, so that the apparent motion of the vessel, and therefore the power of the bar, would usually be merely vertical. Resting one hand caressingly upon the huge column, he exultantly explained that these members were the last word in strength, made up of many separate I-beams and angles of the strongest known special steel, latticed and braced until no conceivable force could make them yield a millimeter. "But why such strength?" asked the lawyer, doubtfully. "This column alone would hold up Brooklyn Bridge." "To hold down the power plant so that the bar won't tear through the ship when we cut her loose," replied Seaton. "Have you any idea how fast this bird can fly?" "Well, I have heard you speak of traveling with the velocity of light, but that is overdrawn, isn't it?" "Not very much. Our figures show that with this 400-pound bar," pointing to the copper cylinder in the exact center of the inner sphere, "we could develop not only the velocity of light, but an acceleration equal to that velocity were it not for the increase in mass at high velocities, as shown by Einstein and others. We can't go very fast near the Earth, of course, as the friction of the air would melt the whole works in a few minutes. Until we get out of the atmosphere, our speed will be limited by the ability of steel to withstand melting, by the friction of the air, to somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 or 5,000 miles per hour, but out in space we can develop any speed we wish, up to that of light as a limit. I studied physics a little in my youth. Wouldn't the mere force of such an acceleration as you mention flatten you on the floor and hold you there? And any sudden jar would certainly kill you." "There can't be any sudden jar. This is a special floor, you notice. It is mounted on long, extremely heavy springs to take up any possible jar. Also, whenever we are putting on power, we won't try to stand up. Our legs would crimple up like strings. We will ride securely strapped into those special seats, which are mounted the same as the floor, only a whole lot more so. As to the acceleration—" "That word means picking up speed, doesn't it?" interrupted Dorothy. "The rate of picking up speed," corrected Seaton. "That is, if you were going 40 miles per hour 1 minute and 50 the next minute, your acceleration would be 10 miles per hour per minute. See? It's acceleration that makes you feel funny when you start up or down in an elevator." Then riding in this thing will be like starting up in an elevator so that your heart sinks into your boots and you can't breathe. Yes, only worse. We will pick up speed faster and keep on doing it. Seriously, interrupted the lawyer, do you think that the human body can stand any such acceleration as that? I don't know. We are going to find out by starting out slowly and increasing our acceleration to as much as we can stand. I see, Vanneman replied. But how are you going to steer her? How do you keep permanent reference points since there are no directions in space? That was our hardest problem, explained Seaton, but Martin solved it perfectly. See the power plant up there? Notice those big supporting rings and bearings? Well, the power plant is entirely separate from the ship, as it is inside that inner sphere, about which the outer sphere and the ship itself are free to revolve in any direction. No matter how much the ship rolls and pitches, as she is bound to do every time we come near enough to any star or planet to be influenced by its gravitation, the bar stays where it is pointed. Those 6 big jackets in the outer sphere on the 6 sides of the bar cover 6 pairs of gyroscope wheels, weighing several tons each, turning at a terrific speed in a vacuum. The gyroscopes keep the whole outer sphere in exactly the same position as long as they are kept turning, and afford us not only permanent planes of reference, but also a solid foundation in those planes which can be used in pointing the bar. The bar can be turned instantly to any direction whatever by special electrical instruments on the boards. You see, the outer sphere stays immovably fixed in that position, with the bar at liberty to turn in any direction inside it, and the ship at liberty to do the same thing outside it. Now we will show you where we sleep, Seaton continued. We have 8 rooms, 4 below and 4 above, leading the way to a narrow, steep steel stairway and down into a very narrow hall, from either side of which 2 doors opened. This is my room. The adjoining one is Mart's. Shiro sleeps across the hall. The rest of the rooms are for our guests on future trips. Sliding back the door, he switched on the light and revealed a small but fully appointed bedroom, completely furnished with everything necessary, yet everything condensed into the least possible space. The floor, like the one above, was of cushioned leather supported by springs. The bed was a modification of the special seats already referred to. Opening another sliding door, he showed them an equally complete and equally compact bathroom. You see, we have all the comforts of home. This bathroom, however, is practical only when we have some force downward, either gravitation or our own acceleration. The same reasoning accounts for the handrails you see everywhere on board. Drifting in space, you know, there is no weight and you can't walk. You must pull yourself around. If you tried to take a step, you would bounce up and hit the ceiling and stay there. That is why the ceilings are so well padded. And if you tried to wash your face, you would throw water all over the place, and it would float around in the air instead of falling to the floor. As long as we can walk, we can use the bathroom. If I should want to wash my face while we are drifting, I just press this button here, and the pilot will put on enough acceleration to make the correct use of water possible. There are a lot of surprising things about a trip into space. I don't doubt it a bit, and I'm simply wild to go for a ride with you. When will you take me, Dickie? Asked Dorothy eagerly. Very soon, Dotty, as soon as we get her in perfect running condition. You shall be the first to ride with us, I promise you. Where do you cook and eat? How do you see out? How about the air and water supply? How do you keep warm or cool, as the case may be? Asked the girl's father, as though he were cross-examining a witness. Shiro has a galley on the main floor, and tables fold up into the wall of the main compartment. The passengers see out by sliding back steel panels which normally cover the windows. The pilot can see in any direction from his seat at the instrument board by means of special instruments, something like periscopes. The windows are made of optical glass, similar to that used in the largest telescopes. They are nearly as thick as the hull and have a compressive resistance almost equal to that of armor steel. Although so thick, they are crystal clear, and a speck of dust on the outer surface is easily seen. We have water enough in tanks to last us 3 months, or indefinitely if we have to be careful, as we can automatically distill and purify all our wastewater, recovering absolutely pure H2O. We have compressed air also in tanks, but we need very little, as the air is constantly being purified. Also, we have oxygen-generating apparatus aboard, in case we should run short. As to keeping warm, we have electric heating coils, run by the practically inexhaustible power of a small metal bar. If we get too near the sun and get too warm, we have a refrigerating machine to cool us off. Anything else? You'd better give up, Dad, laughingly advised his daughter. You've thought of everything, haven't you, Dick? Mart has, I think. This is all his doing, you know. I wouldn't have thought of 1/10 of it myself. I must remind you, young folks, said the older man, glancing at his watch, that it is very late and high time for Dotty and me to be going home. We would like to stay and see the rest of it, but you know we must be away from here before daylight. As they went into the house, Vanneman asked, What does the other side of the moon look like? I have always been curious about it. We were not able to see much, replied Crane. It was too dark, and we did not take the time to explore it. But from what we could see by means of our searchlights, it is very much like this side, the most barren and desolate place imaginable. After we go to Mars, we intend to explore the moon thoroughly. Mars, then, is your first goal? When do you intend to start? We haven't decided definitely. Probably in a day or two. Everything is ready now. As the Vannemans had come out in the streetcar, in order to attract as little attention as possible, Seaton volunteered to take them home in one of Crane's cars. As they bade Crane good night after enjoying Shiro's suitable refreshment, the lawyer took the chauffeur's seat, motioning his daughter and Seaton into the closed body of the car. As soon as they had started, Dorothy turned in the embrace of her lover's arm. "Dick," she said fiercely, "I would have been worried sick if I had known that you were way off there." "I knew it, sweetheart. That's why I didn't tell you we were going. We both knew the Skylark was perfectly safe, but I knew that you would worry about our first trip. Now that we have been to the moon, you won't be uneasy when we go to Mars, will you, dear?" "I can't help it, boy. I will be afraid that something terrible has happened every minute. Won't you take me with you? Then if anything happens, it will happen to both of us, and that is as it should be. You know that I wouldn't want to keep on living if anything should happen to you." He put both arms around her as his reply and pressed his cheek to hers. "Dorothy, sweetheart, I know exactly how you feel. I feel the same way myself. I'm awfully sorry, dear, but I can't do it. I know the machine is safe, but I've got to prove it to everybody else before I take you on a long trip with me. Your father will agree with me that you ought not to go on the first trip or two, anyway. And besides, what would Madame Grundy say?" "Well, there is a way," she began, and he felt her face turn hot. His arms tightened around her, and his breath came fast. "I know it, sweetheart, and I would like nothing better in the world than to be married today and take our honeymoon in the Skylark, but I can't do it. After we come back from the first long trip, we will be married just as soon as you say ready, and after that we will always be together wherever I go. But I can't take even the millionth part of a chance with anything as valuable as you are. You see that, don't you, Dotty?" "I suppose so," she returned disconsolately, "but you'll make it a short trip for my sake. I know I won't rest a minute until you get back. I promise you that we won't be gone more than 4 days. Then for the greatest honeymoon that ever was." And they clung together in the dark body of the car, each busy with solemn and beautiful thoughts of the happiness to come. They soon reached their destination. As they entered the house, Dorothy made one more attempt. "Dad, Dick is just too perfectly mean. He says he won't take me on the first trip. If you were going out there, wouldn't Mother want to go along too?" After listening to Seaton, he gave his decision. "Dick is right, kitten. He must make the long trip first. Then, after the machine is proved reliable, you may go with him. I can think of no better way of spending a honeymoon. It will be a new one at least. And you needn't worry about the boys getting back safely. I might not trust either of them alone, but together they are invincible. Good night, children. I wish you success, Dick, as he turned away. Seaton took a lover's leave of Dorothy and went into the lawyer's study, taking an envelope from his pocket. "Mr. Vanneman," he said in a low voice, "we think the Steel crowd is still camping on our trail. We are ready for them, with a lot of stuff that they never heard of. But in case anything goes wrong, Martin has written between the lines of this legal form in invisible ink A36 exactly how to get possession of all our notes and plans so that the company can go ahead with everything. With those directions, any chemist can find and use the stuff safely. Please put this envelope in the safest place you can think of, and then forget it unless they get both Crane and me. There's about 1 chance in a million of their doing that, but Mart doesn't gamble on even that chance." "He is right, Dick. I believe that you can outwit them in any situation, but I will keep this paper where no one except myself can ever see it, nevertheless. Good night, son, and good luck. The same to you, sir, and thank you. Good night." Chapter 8. Indirect Action. The afternoon following the homecoming of the Skylark, Seaton and Dorothy returned from a long horseback ride in the park. After Seaton had mounted his motorcycle, Dorothy turned toward a bench in the shade of an old elm to watch a game of tennis on the court next door. Scarcely had she seated herself when a great copper-plated ball alighted upon the lawn in front of her. A heavy steel door snapped open, and a powerful figure clad in aviator's leather, the face completely covered by the hood, leaped out. She jumped to her feet with a cry of joyful surprise, thinking it was Seaton, a cry which died suddenly as she realized that Seaton had just left her and that this vessel was far too small to be the Skylark. She turned in flight, but the stranger caught her in 3 strides. She found herself helpless in a pair of arms equal in strength to Seaton's own. Picking her up lightly as a baby, DeQueen carried her over to the space car. Shriek after shriek rang out as she found that her utmost struggles were of no avail against the giant strength of her captor, that her fiercely driven nails glanced harmlessly off the heavy glass and leather of his hood, and that her teeth were equally ineffective against his suit. With the girl in his arms, DeQueen stepped into the vessel, and as the door clanged shut behind them, Dorothy caught a glimpse of another woman, tied hand and foot in one of the side seats of the car. "Tie her feet, Perkins," DeQueen ordered brusquely, holding her around the body so that her feet extended straight out in front of him. "She's a wildcat." As Perkins threw one end of a small rope around her ankles, Dorothy doubled up her knees, drawing her feet as far away from him as possible. As he incautiously approached, she kicked out viciously with all the force of her muscular young body behind her heavy riding boots. The sharp heel of one small boot struck Perkins squarely in the pit of the stomach, a true solar plexus blow, and completely knocked out, he staggered back against the instrument board. His outflung arm pushed the speed lever clear out to its last notch, throwing the entire current of the batteries through the bar, which was pointed straight up, as it had been when they made their landing, and closing the switch, which threw on the power of the repelling outer coating. There was a creak of the mighty steel fabric, stressed almost to its limit as the vessel darted upward with its stupendous velocity, and only the carefully planned spring and cushion floor saved their lives as they were thrown flat and held there by the awful force of their acceleration as the space car tore through the thin layer of the Earth's atmosphere. So terrific was their speed that the friction of the air did not have time to set them afire. They were through it, and into the perfect vacuum of interstellar space before the thick steel hull was even warmed through. Dorothy lay flat upon her back, just as she had fallen, unable even to move her arms, gaining each breath only by a terrible effort. Perkins was a huddled heap under the instrument board. The other captive, Brookings' ex-secretary, was in somewhat better case, as her bonds had snapped like string and she was lying at full length in one of the side seats, forced into that position and held there, as the design of the seats was adapted for the most comfortable position possible under such conditions. She, like Dorothy, was gasping for breath, her straining muscles barely able to force air into her lungs because of the paralyzing weight of her chest. Duquesne alone was able to move, and it required of his Herculean strength to creep and crawl snake-like toward the instrument board. Finally attaining his goal, he summoned all his strength to grasp, not the controlling lever which he knew was beyond his reach, but a cut-out switch only a couple of feet above his head. With a series of convulsive movements, he fought his way up, first until he was crouching on his elbows and knees, and then into a squatting position. Placing his left hand under his right, he made a last supreme effort. Perspiration streamed from him. His mighty muscles stood out in ridges, visible even under the heavy leather of his coat. His lips parted in a snarl over his locked teeth as he threw every ounce of his wonderful body into an effort to force his right hand up to the switch. His hand approached it slowly, closed over it, and pulled it out. The result was startling. With the mighty power instantly cut off, and with not even the ordinary force of gravitation to counteract the force Duquesne was exerting, his own muscular effort hurled him up toward the center of the car and against the instrument board. The switch, still in his grasp, was again closed. His shoulder crashed against the levers which controlled the direction of the bar, swinging it through a wide arc. As the ship darted off in the new direction with all its old acceleration, he was hurled against the instrument board, tearing one end loose from its supports and falling unconscious to the floor on the other side. After a time, which seemed like an eternity, Dorothy and the other girl felt their senses slowly leave them. With 4 unconscious passengers, the space car hurtled through empty space, its already inconceivable velocity being augmented every second by a quantity bringing its velocity near to that of light, driven onward by the incredible power of the disintegrating copper bar. Seaton had gone only a short distance from his sweetheart's home when over the purring of his engine he thought he heard Dorothy's voice raised in a scream. He did not wait to make sure, but whirled his machine about, and the purring changed instantly to a staccato roar as he threw open the throttle and advanced the spark. Gravel flew from beneath his skidding wheels as he negotiated the turn into the Vanneman grounds at suicidal speed. But with all his haste he arrived upon the scene just in time to see the door of the space car close. Before he could reach it, the vessel disappeared, with nothing to mark its departure save a violent whirl of grass and sod, uprooted and carried far into the air by the vacuum of its wake. To the excited tennis players and the screaming mother of the abducted girl, it seemed as though the great metal ball had vanished utterly. Only Seaton, knowing what to expect, saw the line it made in the air, and saw for an instant a minute dot in the sky before it disappeared. Interrupting the clamor of the young people, each of whom was trying to tell him what had happened, he spoke to Mrs. Vanneman. "Mother, Dottie's all right," he said rapidly but gently. "Steele's got her, but they won't keep her long. Don't worry, we'll get her. It may take a week or it may take a year, but we'll bring her back." And leaping upon his motorcycle, he shattered all the speed laws on his way to Crane's house. "Mart," he yelled, rushing into the shop, "they've got Dottie in a bus made from our plans. Let's go!" As he started on a run for the testing shed. "Wait a minute," crisply shouted Crane. "Don't go off half-cocked. What is your plan?" "Plan, hell!" barked the enraged chemist. "Chase 'em! Which way did they go and when?" "Straight up, full power 20 minutes ago." "Too long ago. Straight up has changed its direction several degrees since then. They may have covered 1,000,000 miles, or they may have come back and landed next door. Sit down and think. We need all your brains now." Regaining his self-possession as the wisdom of his friend's advice came home to him, sat down and pulled out his pipe. There was a tense silence for an instant. Then he leaped to his feet and darted into his room, returning with an object compass whose needle pointed upward. "Duquesne did it!" he cried exultantly. "This baby is still looking right at him. Now let's go. Make it snappy." "Not yet. We should find out how far away they are. That may give us an idea." Suiting action to word, he took up his stopwatch and set the needle swinging. They watched it with strained faces. Second after second went by, and it still continued to swing. When it had come to rest, Crane read his watch and made a rapid calculation. "About 350 million miles," he stated. clear out of our solar system already, and from the distance covered he must have had a constant acceleration so as to approximate the velocity of light, and he is still going with full. But nothing can possibly go that fast, Mart. It's impossible. How about Einstein's theory? That is a theory. This measurement of distance is a fact, as you know from our tests. That's right. Another good theory gone to pot. But how do you account for his distance? Do you suppose he's lost control? He must have. I do not believe that he would willingly stand that acceleration, nor that he would have gone that far of his own accord. Do you? I sure don't. We don't know how big a bar they are carrying, so we can't estimate how long it is going to take us to catch them. But let's not waste any more time, Mart. For cat's sake, let's get busy. We have only those 4 bars, Dick, 2 for each unit. Do you think that will be enough? Think of how far we may have to go, what we may possibly get into, and what it will mean to Dotty if we fail for lack of power. Seaton, though furiously eager to be off, paused at this new idea, and half regretfully he replied, "We are so far behind them already that I guess a few hours more won't make much difference. It sure would be disastrous to get out near one of the fixed stars and have our power quit." "I guess you're right. We'd better get a couple more. Make it 4. Then we'll have enough to chase them half our lives. We'd better load up on grub and explosive ammunition, too." While Crane and Shiro carried additional provisions and boxes of cartridges into the Skylark, Seaton once more mounted his motorcycle and sped across the city to the brass foundry. The manager of the plant took his order, but blandly informed him that there was not that much copper in the city, that it would be a week or 10 days before the order could be filled. Seaton suggested that they melt up some copper cable and other goods already manufactured, offering 10 times their value, but the manager was obdurate, saying that he could not violate the rule of priority of orders. Seaton then went to other places, endeavoring to buy scrap copper, trolley wire, electric cable, anything made of the ruddy metal, but found none for sale in quantities large enough to be of any use. After several hours of fruitless search, he returned home in a towering rage and explained to Crane in lurid language his failure to secure the copper. The latter was unmoved. "After you left, it occurred to me that you might not get any. You see, Steele is still watching us." Fire shot from Seaton's eyes. "I'm going to clean up that bunch," he gritted through his teeth as he started straight for the door. "Not yet, Dick," Crane remonstrated. "We can go down to Wilson's in a few minutes, and I know we can get it there if he has it. The Skylark is all ready to travel." No more words were needed. They hurried into the space car, and soon were standing in the office of the plant in which the vessel had been built. When they had made their wants known, the Iron Master shook his head. "I'm sorry, Crane, but I have only a few pounds of copper in the shop, and we have no suitable furnace." Seaton broke out violently at this, but Crane interrupted him, explaining their inability to get them anywhere else and the urgency of their need. When he had finished, Wilson brought his fist down upon his desk. "I'll get it if I have to melt up our dynamos," he roared. "We'll have to rig a crucible, but we'll have your bars out just as soon as the whole force of this damned scrap heap can make 'em." Calling in his foreman, he bellowed orders, and while automobiles scoured the nearby towns for scrap copper, the crucible and molds were made ready. Nearly 2 days passed before the gleaming copper cylinders were finished. During this time, Crane added to their already complete equipment every article he could conceive of their having any use for, while Seaton raged up and down the plant in a black fury of impatience. Just before the bars were ready, they made another reading on the object compass. Their faces grew tense and drawn, and their hearts turned sick as second followed second and minute followed minute, and the needle still oscillated. Finally, however, it came to rest, and Seaton's voice almost failed him as he read his figures. 235 light-years, Mart. They're lost and still going. Goodbye, old scout. Holding out his hand, "Tell Vanneman that I'll bring her back or else stay out there myself." "You must be crazy, Dick. You know I am going." "Why? No use in both of us taking such a chance. If Dotty's gone, of course I want to go too, but you don't." "Nonsense, Dick. Of course, this is somewhat farther than we had planned on going for our maiden voyage, but where is the difference? It is just as safe to go 1,000 light-years as only one, and we have power and food for any contingency. There is no more danger in this trip than there is in one to Mars. At all events, I am going whether you want me to or not, so save your breath. You lie like a thief, Mart. You know what we are up against as well as I do, but if you insist on coming along, I'm sure glad to have you." As their hands met in a crushing grip, the bars were brought up and loaded into the carriers. Waving goodbye to Wilson, they closed the massive door and took their positions. Seaton adjusted the bar parallel with the needle of the object compass, turned on the coil, and advanced the speed lever until Crane, reading the pyrometers, warned him to slow down as the shell was heating. Free of the Earth's atmosphere, he slowly advanced the lever 1 notch at a time until he could no longer support the increasing weight of his hand, but had to draw out the rolling support designed for that emergency. He pushed the lever a few notches farther and felt himself forced down violently into the seat. He was now lying at full length, the seat having automatically moved upward so that his hand still controlled the lever. Still, he kept putting on more power until the indicator showed that more than 3/4 of the power was in operation, and he felt that he could stand but little more. "How are you making it, Mart?" he asked, talking with difficulty because of the great weight of his tongue and jaws. "All right so far," came the response, in a hesitating, almost stammering voice. "But I do not know how much more I can take. If you can stand it, go ahead. This is enough for a while, until we get used to it. Any time you want to rest, tell me and I'll cut her down. Keep her at this for 4 or 5 hours, then cut down until we can walk so that we can eat and take another reading on distance. Remember that it will take as long to stop as it does to get up speed, and that we must be careful not to ram them. There would be nothing left of either car." "All right, talking's too darn much work. I'll talk to you again when we ease down. I sure am glad we're on our way at last." Chapter 9. Lost in space. For 48 hours, the uncontrolled atomic motor dragged the masterless vessel, with its 4 unconscious passengers, through the illimitable reaches of empty space, with an awful and constantly increasing velocity. When only a few traces of copper remained in the power plant, the acceleration began to decrease, and the powerful springs began to restore the floor and the seats to their normal positions. The last particle of copper having been transformed into energy, the speed of the vessel became constant. Apparently motionless to those inside it, it was in reality traversing space with a velocity thousands of times greater than that of light. As the force which had been holding them down was relaxed, the lungs, which had been able to secure only air enough to maintain faint sparks of life, began to function more normally, and soon all 4 recovered consciousness, drinking in the life-giving oxygen in a rapid succession of breaths so deep that it seemed as though their lungs must burst with each inhalation. Duquesne was the first to gain control of himself. His first effort to rise to his feet lifted him from the floor, and he floated lightly to the ceiling, striking it with a gentle bump and remaining suspended in the air. The others, who had not yet attempted to move, stared at him in wide-eyed amazement. Reaching out and clutching one of the supporting columns, he drew himself back to the floor and cautiously removed his leather suit, transferring 2 heavy automatic pistols as he did so. By gingerly feeling of his injured body, he discovered that no bones were broken, although he was terribly bruised. He then glanced around to learn how his companions were faring. He saw that they were all sitting up, the girls resting, Perkins removing his aviator's costume. "Good morning, Dr. Duquesne. What happened when I kicked your friend?" Duquesne smiled. "Good morning, Miss Vanneman. Several things happened. He fell into the controls, turning on all the juice. We left shortly afterward. I tried to shut the power off, and in doing so, I balled things up worse than ever. Then I went to sleep and just woke up. Have you any idea where we are?" "No, but I can make a fair estimate, I think." And glancing at the empty chamber in which the bar had been, he took out his notebook and pen and figured for a few minutes. As he finished, he drew himself along by a handrail to one of the windows, then to another. He returned with a puzzled expression on his face and made a long calculation. "I don't know exactly what to make of this," he said thoughtfully. "We are so far away from the Earth that even the fixed stars are unrecognizable. The power was on exactly 48 hours, since that is the life of that particular bar under full current. We should still be close to our own solar system, since it is theoretically impossible to develop any velocity greater than that of light. But in fact, we have. I know enough about astronomy to recognize the fixed stars from any point within a light year or so of the sun, and I can't see a single familiar star. I never could see how mass could be a function of velocity, and now I am convinced that it is not. We have been accelerating for 48 hours. He turned to Dorothy. While we were unconscious, Miss Vanneman, we had probably attained a velocity of something like 7,413,000,000 miles per second, and that is the approximate speed at which we are now traveling. We must be nearly 6 quadrillion miles, and that is a space of several hundred light-years, away from our solar system, or, more plainly, about 6 times as far away from our Earth as the North Star is. We couldn't see our sun with a telescope, even if we knew which way to look for it." At this paralyzing news, Dorothy's face turned white, and Margaret Spencer quietly fainted in her seat. "Then we can never get back?" asked Dorothy slowly. At this question, Perkins's self-control gave way, and his thin veneer of decency disappeared completely. "You got us into this whole thing!" he screamed as he leaped at Dorothy with murderous fury gleaming in his pale eyes and his fingers curved into talons. Instead of reaching her, however, he merely sprawled grotesquely in midair, and Duquesne knocked him clear across the vessel with one powerful blow of his fist. "Get back there, you cowardly cur," he said evenly. "Even though we're a long way from home, try to remember you're a man at least. One more break like that, and I'll throw you out of the boat. It isn't her fault that we are out here, but our own. The blame for it is a very small matter anyway. The thing of importance is to get back as soon as possible." "But how can we get back?" asked Perkins sullenly from the corner where he was crouching, fear in every feature. "The power is gone, the controls are wrecked, and we are hopelessly lost in space." "Oh, I wouldn't say hopelessly," returned the other. "I have never been in any situation yet that I couldn't get out of, and I won't be convinced until I am dead that I can't get out of this one. We have 2 extra power bars, we can fix the board, and if I can't navigate us back close enough to our solar system to find it, I am more of a dub than I think I am. How about a little bite to eat?" "Show us where it is!" exclaimed Dorothy. "Now that you mention it, I find that I am starved to death." Duquesne looked at her keenly. "I admire your nerve, Miss Vanneman. I didn't suppose that animal over there would show such a wide streak of yellow, but I was rather afraid that you girls might go to pieces." "I'm scared blue, of course," Dorothy admitted frankly. "But hysterics won't do any good, and we simply must get back." "Certainly we must, and we will," stated Duquesne calmly. "If you like, you might find something for us to eat in the galley there, while I see what I can do with this board that I wrecked with my head. By the way, that cubbyhole there is the apartment reserved for you 2 ladies. We are in rather cramped quarters, but I think you will find everything you need." As Dorothy drew herself along the handrail toward the room designated, accompanied by the other girl who, though conscious, had paid little attention to anything around her, she could not help feeling a thrill of admiration for the splendid villain who had abducted her. Calm and cool, always master of himself, apparently paying no attention to the terrible bruises which disfigured half his face and doubtless half his body as well, she admitted to herself that it was only his example which had enabled her to maintain her self-control in their present plight. As she crawled over Perkins' discarded suit, she remembered that he had not taken any weapons from it. After a rapid glance around to assure herself that she was not being watched, she quickly searched the coat, bringing to light not 1 but 2 pistols, which she thrust into her pocket. She saw with relief that they were regulation army automatics, with whose use she was familiar from much target practice with Seaton. In the room, which was a miniature of the one she had seen on the Skylark, the girls found clothing, toilet articles, and everything necessary for a long trip. As they were setting themselves to rights, Dorothy electing to stay in her riding suit, they surveyed each other frankly, and each was reassured by what she saw. Dorothy saw a girl of 22, of her own stature, with a mass of heavy, wavy black hair. Her eyes, a singularly rich and deep brown, contrasted strangely with the beautiful ivory of her skin. She was normally a beautiful girl, thought Dorothy, but her beauty was marred by suffering and privation. Her naturally slender form was thin, her face was haggard and worn. The stranger broke the silence. "I'm Margaret Spencer," she began abruptly, "former secretary to His Royal Highness Brookings of Steel. They swindled my father out of an invention worth millions, and he died, broken-hearted. I got the job to see if I couldn't get enough evidence to convict them, and I had quite a lot when they caught me. I had some things that they were afraid to lose, and I had them so well hidden that they couldn't find them. So they kidnapped me to make me give them back. They haven't dared kill me so far for fear the evidence will show up after my death, which it will. However, I will be legally dead before long, and then they know the whole thing will come out, so they have brought me out here to make me talk or kill me. Talking won't do me any good now, though, and I don't believe it ever would have. They would have killed me after they got the stuff back anyway. So you see, I at least will never get back to the Earth alive. Cheer up, we'll all get back safely." "No, we won't. You don't know that man Perkins, if that is his name. I never heard him called any real name before. He is simply unspeakable, vile, hideous, everything that is base. He was my jailer, and I utterly loathe and despise him. He is mean and underhanded and tricky. He reminds me of a slimy, poisonous snake. He will kill me, I know it." "But how about Dr. Duquesne? Surely he isn't that kind of man. He wouldn't let him." "I've never met him before, but from what I heard of him in the office, he's even worse than Perkins, but in an entirely different way. There's nothing small or mean about him, and I don't believe he would go out of his way to hurt anyone, and as Perkins would. But he is absolutely cold and hard, a perfect fiend. Where his interests are concerned, there's nothing under the sun, good or bad, that he won't do. But I'm glad that Perkins had me instead of the doctor, as they call him. Perkins raises such a bitter personal feeling that anybody would rather die than give up to him in anything. Duquesne, however, would have tortured me impersonally and scientifically, cold and self-contained all the while and using the most efficient methods, and I am sure he would have got it out of me some way. He always gets what he goes after." "Oh, come, Miss Spencer." Dorothy interrupted the half-hysterical girl. "You're too hard on him. Didn't you see him knock Perkins down when he came after me? Well, maybe he has a few gentlemanly instincts, which he uses when he doesn't lose anything by it. More likely he merely intended to rebuke him for a useless action. He is a firm pragmatist. Anything that is useful is all right. Anything that is useless is a crime. More probably yet, he wants you left alive. Of course, that is his real reason. He went to the trouble of kidnapping you, so naturally he won't let Perkins or anybody else kill you until he is through with you. Otherwise, he would have let Perkins do anything he wanted to with you, without lifting a finger." "I can't quite believe that," Dorothy replied, though a cold chill struck at her heart as she remembered the inhuman crime attributed to this man, and she quailed at the thought of being in his charge, countless millions of miles from Earth. A thought only partly counteracted by the fact that she was now armed. "He has treated us with every consideration so far. Let's hope for the best. Anyway, I'm sure that we'll get back safely." "Why so sure? Have you something up your sleeve?" "No. Or yes, in a way I have, though nothing very definite. I'm Dorothy Vanneman, and I am engaged to the man who discovered the thing that makes this space car go." "That's why they kidnapped you?" "Then, to make him give up all his rights to it. It's like them." "Yes, I think that's why they did it. But they won't keep me long. Dick Seaton will find me, I know. I feel it." "But that's exactly what they want," cried Margaret excitedly. "In my spying around, I heard a little about this very thing. The name Seaton brings it to my mind. His car is broken in some way, so that it will kill him the first time he tries to run it. That's where they underestimated Dick and his partner. You have heard of Martin Crane, of course. I think I heard his name mentioned in the office, together with Seaton's, but that's all. Well, besides other things, Martin is quite a wonderful mechanic, and he found out that our Skylark was spoiled, so they built another one a lot bigger, and I am sure that they are following us right now. But how can they possibly follow us when we are going so fast and are so far away? Queried the other girl, once more despondent. I don't quite know, but I do know that Dick will find a way. He's simply wonderful. He knows more now than that Dr. Duquesne will ever learn in all his life, and he will find us in a few days. I feel it in my bones. Besides, I picked Perkins' pockets of these 2 pistols. Can you shoot an automatic? Yes, replied the other girl, as she seized one of the guns, assured herself that its magazine was full, and slipped it into her pocket. I used to practice a lot with my father's. This makes me feel a whole lot better. And call me Peggy, won't you? It will seem good to hear my name again. After what I've been through lately, even this trip will be a vacation for me. Well then, cheer up, Peggy dear. We're going to be great friends. Let's go get us all something to eat. I'm simply starved, and I know you are too. The presence of the pistol in her pocket and Dorothy's unwavering faith in her lover lifted the stranger out of the mood of despair into which the long imprisonment, the brutal treatment, and the present situation had plunged her, and she was almost cheerful as they drew themselves along the handrail leading to the tiny galley. I simply can't get used to the idea of nothing having any weight. Look here, laughed Dorothy. She took a boiled ham out of the refrigerator and hung it upon an imaginary hook in the air, where it remained motionless. Doesn't it make you feel funny? It is a queer sensation. I feel light, like a toy balloon, and I feel awfully weird inside. If we have no weight, why does it hurt so when we bump into anything? And when you throw anything, like the doctor did Perkins, why does it hit as hard as ever? It's mass or inertia or something like that. A thing has it everywhere, whether it weighs anything or not. Dick explained it all to me. I understood it when he told me about it, but I'm afraid it didn't sink in very deep. Did you ever study physics? I had a year of it in college, but it was more or less of a joke. I went to a girls' school, and all we had to do in physics was to get the credit. We didn't have to learn it. Me too. Next time I go to school, I'm going to Yale or Harvard or some such place, and I'll learn so much mathematics and science that I'll have to wear a bandeau to keep my massive intellect in place. During this conversation, they had prepared a substantial luncheon and had arranged it daintily upon 2 large trays, in spite of the difficulty caused by the fact that nothing would remain in place by its own weight. The feast prepared, Dorothy took her tray from the table as carefully as she could and saw the sandwiches and bottles start to float toward the ceiling. Hastily inverting the tray above the escaping viands, she pushed them back down upon the table. In doing so, she lifted herself clear from the floor, as she had forgotten to hold herself down. "What'll we do, anyway?" She wailed when she had recovered her position. "Everything wants to fly all over the place." "Put another tray on top of it and hold them together," suggested Margaret. "I wish we had a bird cage. Then we could open the door and grab a sandwich as it flies out." By covering the trays, the girls finally carried the luncheon out into the main compartment, where they gave Duquesne and Perkins one of the trays, and all fell to eating hungrily. Duquesne paused with a glint of amusement in his one sound eye as he saw Dorothy trying to pour ginger ale out of a bottle. "It can't be done, Miss Vanneman. You'll have to drink it through a straw." "That will work, since our air pressure is normal. Be careful not to choke on it, though. Your swallowing will have to be all muscular out here. Gravity won't help you. Or wait a bit. I have the control board fixed, and it will be a matter of only a few minutes to put in another bar and get enough acceleration to take the place of gravity." He placed one of the extra power bars in the chamber and pushed the speed lever into the first notch, and there was a lurch of the whole vessel as it swung around the bar so that the floor was once more perpendicular to it. He took a couple of steps, returned, and advanced the lever another notch. There, that's about the same as gravity. Now we can act like human beings and eat in comfort." "That's a wonderful relief, Doctor," cried Dorothy. "Are we going back toward the Earth?" "Not yet. I reversed the bar, but we will have to use up all of this one before we can even start back. Until this bar is gone, we will merely be slowing down." As the meal progressed, Dorothy noticed that Duquesne's left arm seemed almost helpless, and that he ate with great difficulty because of his terribly bruised face. As soon as they had removed the trays, she went into her room, where she had seen a small medicine chest, and brought out a couple of bottles. "Lie down here, Dr. Duquesne," she commanded. "I'm going to apply a little first aid to the injured. Arnica and iodine are all I can find, but they'll help a little." "I'm all right," began the scientist, but at her imperious gesture he submitted, and she bathed his battered features with the healing lotion and painted the worst bruises with iodine. "I see your arm is lame. Where does it hurt?" "Shoulder's the worst. I rammed it through the board when we started out." He opened his shirt at the throat and bared his shoulder, and Dorothy gasped, as much at the size and power of the muscles displayed as at the extent and severity of the man's injuries. Stepping into the galley, she brought out hot water and towels and gently bathed away the clotted blood that had been forced through the skin. "Massage it a little with the arnica as I move the arm," he directed coolly, and she did so, pityingly. He did not wince and made no sign of pain, but she saw beads of perspiration appear upon his face and wondered at his fortitude. "That's fine," he said gratefully as she finished, and a peculiar expression came over his face. "It feels 100% better already. But why do you do it? I should think you would feel like crowning me with that basin instead of playing nurse." "Efficiency," she replied with a smile. "I'm taking a leaf out of your own book. You are our chief engineer, you know, and it won't do to have you laid up." "That's a logical explanation, but it doesn't go far enough," he rejoined, still studying her intently. She did not reply, but turned to Perkins. "How are you, Mr. Perkins? Do you require medical attention?" "No," growled Perkins from the seat in which he had crouched immediately after eating. "Keep away from me, or I'll cut your heart out." "Shut up," snapped Duquesne. "Remember what I said?" "I haven't done anything," snarled the other. "I said I would throw you out if you made another break," Duquesne informed him evenly, "and I meant it. If you can't talk decently, keep still. Understand that you are to keep off Miss Vanneman, words and actions. I am in charge of her, and I will put up with no interference whatever. This is your last warning." "How about Spencer, then?" "I have nothing to say about her. She's not mine," responded Duquesne with a shrug. An evil light appeared in Perkins' eyes, and he took out a wicked-looking knife and began to strop it carefully upon the leather of the seat, glaring at his victim the while. "Well, I have something to say," blazed Dorothy, but she was silenced by a gesture from Margaret, who calmly took the pistol from her pocket, jerked the slide back, throwing a cartridge into the chamber, and held the weapon up on one finger, admiring it from all sides. "Don't worry about his knife. He has been sharpening it for my benefit for the last month. He doesn't mean anything by it." At this unexpected show of resistance, Perkins stared at her for an instant, then glanced at his coat. "Yes, this was yours once. You needn't bother about picking up your coat. They're both gone. You might be tempted to throw that knife. So drop it on the floor and kick it over to me before I count 3. 1. The heavy pistol steadied into line with his chest, and her finger tightened on the trigger. 2. He obeyed, and she picked up the knife. He turned to Duquesne, who had watched the scene unmoved, a faint smile upon his saturnine face. "Doctor!" he cried, shaking with fear. "Why don't you shoot her or take that gun away from her? Surely you don't want to see me murdered?" "Why not?" replied Duquesne calmly. "It is nothing to me whether she kills you or you kill her. You brought it on yourself by your own carelessness. Any man with brains doesn't leave guns lying around within reach of prisoners, and a blind man could have seen Miss Vanneman getting your hardware." "You saw her take them and didn't warn me?" croaked Perkins. "Why should I warn you? If you can't take care of your own prisoner, she earns her liberty, as far as I am concerned. I never did like your style, Perkins, especially your methods of handling, or rather mishandling, women. You could have made her give up the stuff she recovered from that ass Brookings inside of an hour, and wouldn't have had to kill her afterward either." "How?" sneered the other. "If you are so good at that kind of thing, why didn't you try it on Seaton and Crane? There are 7 different methods to use on a woman like Miss Spencer, each of which will produce the desired result. The reason I did not try them on either Seaton or Crane is that they would have failed. Your method of indirect action is probably the only one that will succeed. That is why I adopted it." "Well, what are you going to do about it?" shrieked Perkins. "Are you going to sit there and lecture all day?" "I am going to do nothing whatever," answered the scientist coldly. "If you had any brains, you would see that you are in no danger. Miss Spencer will undoubtedly kill you if you attack her, not otherwise. That is an Anglo-Saxon weakness." "Did you see me take the pistols?" queried Dorothy. "Certainly. I'm not blind. You have one of them in your right coat pocket now." "Then why didn't you, or don't you, try to take it away from me?" she asked in wonder. "If I had objected to your having them, you would never have got them. If I didn't want you to have a gun now, I would take it away from you. You know that, don't you?" And his black eyes stared into her violet ones with such calm certainty of his ability that she felt her heart sink. "Yes," she admitted finally, "I believe you could. That is, unless I were angry enough to shoot you." "That wouldn't help you. I can shoot faster and straighter than you can, and would shoot it out of your hand. However, I have no objection to your having the gun, since it is no part of my plan to offer you any further indignity of any kind. Even if you had the necessary coldness of nerve or cruelty of disposition, of which I have one, Perkins the other, and you neither, you wouldn't shoot me now, because you can't get back to the earth without me. After we get back, I will take the guns away from both of you if I think it desirable. In the meantime, play with them all you please." "Has Perkins any more knives or guns or things in his room?" demanded Dorothy. "How should I know?" indifferently. Then, as both girls started for Perkins' room, he ordered brusquely, "Sit down, Miss Vanneman. Let them fight it out. Perkins has his orders to lay off you. You lay off him. I'm not taking any chances of getting you hurt. That's one reason I wanted you armed. If he gets gay, shoot him. Otherwise, hands off completely." Dorothy threw up her head in defiance, but meeting his cold stare, she paused irresolutely and finally sat down, biting her lips in anger, while the other girl went on. "That's better. She doesn't need any help to whip that yellow dog. He's whipped already. He never would think of fighting unless the odds were 3-1 in his favor." When Margaret had returned from a fruitless search of Perkins' room and had assured herself that he had no more weapons concealed about his person, she thrust the pistol back into her pocket and sat down. "That ends that," she declared. "I guess you will be good now, won't you, Mr. Perkins?" "Yes," that worthy muttered. "I have to be, now that you've got the drop on me and Duquesne's gone back on me. But wait until we get back. I'll get you then, you. Stop right there!" Sharply. "There's nothing I would rather do than shoot you right now if you give me the slightest excuse, such as that name you were about to call me. Now, go ahead." Duquesne broke the silence that followed. "Well, now that the battle is over, and since we are fed and rested, I suggest that we slow down a bit and get ready to start back. Pick out comfortable seats, everybody, and I'll shoot a little more juice through that bar." Seating himself before the instrument board, he advanced the speed lever slowly until nearly 3/4 of the full power was on, as much as he thought the others could stand. For 60 hours he drove the car, reducing the acceleration only at intervals during which they ate and walked about their narrow quarters in order to restore the blood to circulation in their suffering bodies. The power was not reduced for sleep. Everyone slept as best he could. Dorothy and Margaret talked together at every opportunity, and a real intimacy grew up between them. Perkins was for the most part sullenly quiet, knowing himself despised by all the others and having no outlet here for his particular brand of cleverness. Duquesne was always occupied with his work, and only occasionally addressed a remark to one or another of the party, except during meals. At those periods of general recuperation he talked easily and well upon many topics. There was no animosity in his bearing, nor did he seem to perceive any directed toward himself. But when any of the others ventured to infringe upon his ideas of how discipline should be maintained, Duquesne's reproof was merciless. Dorothy almost liked him, but Margaret insisted that she considered him worse than ever. When the bar was exhausted, Duquesne lifted the sole remaining cylinder into place. "We should be nearly stationary with respect to the Earth," he remarked. "Now we will start back." "Why, it felt as though we were picking up speed for the last 3 days!" exclaimed Margaret. "Yes, it feels that way because we have nothing to judge by. Slowing down in one direction feels exactly like starting up in the opposite one. There is no means of knowing whether we are standing still, going away from the Earth, or going toward it, since we have nothing stationary upon which to make observations. However, since the 2 bars were of exactly the same size, and were exerted in opposite directions, except for a few minutes after we left the Earth, we are nearly stationary now. I will put on power until this bar is something less than half gone, then coast for 3 or 4 days. By the end of that time, we should be able to recognize our solar system from the appearance of the fixed stars." He again advanced the lever, and for many hours silence filled the car as it hurtled through space. Duquesne, waking up from a long nap, saw that the bar no longer pointed toward the top of the ship, perpendicular to the floor, but was inclined at a sharp angle. He reduced the current and felt the lurch of the car as it swung around the bar, increasing the angle many degrees. He measured the angle carefully and peered out of all the windows on one side of the car. Returning to the bar after a time, he again measured the angle and found that it had increased greatly. "What's the matter, Dr. Duquesne?" asked Dorothy, who had also been asleep. "We are being deflected from our course. You see the bar doesn't point straight up any more? Of course the direction of the bar hasn't changed. The car has swung around it. What does that mean? We have come close enough to some star so that its attraction swings the bottom of the car around. Normally, you know, the bottom of the car follows directly behind the bar. It doesn't mean much yet, except that we are being drawn away from our straight line, but if the attraction gets much stronger, it may make us miss our solar system completely. I have been looking for the star in question, but can't see it yet. We'll probably pull away from it very shortly." He threw on the power, and for some time watched the bar anxiously, expecting to see it swing back into the vertical, but the angle continually increased. He again reduced the current and searched the heavens for the troublesome body. "Do you see it yet?" asked Dorothy with concern. "No, there's apparently nothing near enough to account for all this deflection." He took out a pair of large night glasses and peered through them for several minutes. "Good God, it's a dead sun, and we're nearly onto it. It looks as large as our moon." Springing to the board, he whirled the bar into the vertical. He took down a strange instrument, went to the bottom window, and measured the apparent size of the dark star. Then, after cautioning the rest of the party to sit tight, he advanced the lever farther than it had been before. After half an hour, he again slackened the pace and made another observation, finding to his astonishment that the dark mass had almost doubled its apparent size. Dorothy, noting his expression, was about to speak, but he forestalled her. "We lost ground instead of gaining that spurt," he remarked as he hastened to his post. "It must be inconceivably large to exert such an enormous attractive force at this distance. We'll have to put on full power. Hang on to yourselves as best you can." He then pushed the lever out to its last notch and left it there until the bar was nearly gone, only to find that the faint disk of the monster globe was even larger than before, being now visible to the unaided eye. Revived, the 3 others saw it plainly, a great dim circle, visible as is the dark portion of the new moon, and, the power shut off, they felt themselves falling toward it with sickening speed. Perkins screamed with mad fear and flung himself grovelling upon the floor. Margaret, her nerves still unstrung, clutched at her heart with both hands. Dorothy, though her eyes looked like great black holes in her white face, looked Duquesne in the eye steadily. "This is the end, then?" "Not yet," he replied in a calm and level voice. The end will not come for a good many hours, as I have calculated that it will take at least 2 days, probably more, to fall the distance we have to go. We have all that time in which to think out a way of escape. Won't the outer repulsive shell keep us from striking it, or at least break the force of our fall? No, it was designed only as protection from meteorites and other small bodies. It is heavy enough to swing us away from a small planet, but it will be used up long before we strike. He lighted a cigarette and sat at ease, as though in his own study. His brow wrinkled in thought as he made calculations in his notebook. Finally, he rose to his feet. There's only one chance that I can see. That is to gather up every scrap of copper we have and try to pull ourselves far enough out of line so that we will take a hyperbolic orbit around that body instead of falling into it. What good will that do us? Asked Margaret, striving for self-control. We will starve to death finally, won't we? Not necessarily. That will give us time to figure out something else. You won't have to figure out anything else, Doctor, stated Dorothy positively. If we miss that moon, Dick and Martin will find us before very long. Not in this life. If they tried to follow us, they're both dead before now. That's where even you are wrong, she flashed at him. They knew you were wrecking our machine, so they built another one, a good one. And they know a lot of things about this new metal that you have never dreamed of since they were not in the plans you stole. Duquesne went directly to the heart of the matter, paying no attention to her barbed shafts. Can they follow us through space without seeing us? He demanded. Yes, or at least I think they can. How do they do it? I don't know. I wouldn't tell you if I did. You'll tell if you know, he declared, his voice cutting like a knife. But that can wait until after we get out of this. The thing to do now is to dodge that world. He searched the vessel for copper, ruthlessly tearing out almost everything that contained the metal, hammering it flat and throwing it into the power plant. He set the bar at right angles to the line of their fall and turned on the current. When the metal was exhausted, he made another series of observations upon the body toward which they were falling, and reported quietly, We made a lot of distance, but not enough. Everything goes in this time. He tore out the single remaining light wire, leaving the car in darkness save for the diffused light of his electric torch, and broke up the only remaining motor. He then took his almost priceless Swiss watch, his heavy signet ring, his scarf pin, and the cartridges from his pistol, and added them to the collection. Flashing his lamp upon Perkins, he relieved him of everything he had which contained copper. I think I have a few pennies in my pocketbook, suggested Dorothy. Get 'em, he directed briefly, and while she was gone he searched Margaret, without result save for the cartridges in her pistol, as she had no jewelry remaining after her imprisonment. Dorothy returned and handed him everything she had found. I would like to keep this ring, she said slowly, pointing to a slender circlet of gold set with a solitaire diamond, if you think there is any chance of us getting clear. Everything goes that has any copper in it, he said coldly, and I am glad to see that Seaton is too good a chemist to buy any platinum jewelry. You may keep the diamond, though, as he wrenched the jewel out of its setting and returned it to her. He threw all the metal into the central chamber, and the vessel gave a tremendous lurch as the power was again applied. It was soon spent, however, and after the final observation, the others waiting in breathless suspense for him to finish his calculations, he made his curt announcement. Not enough! Perkins, his mind weakened by the strain of the last few days, went completely insane at the words. With a wild howl, he threw himself at the unmoved scientist, who struck him with the butt of his pistol as he leaped, the mighty force of Duquesne's blow crushing his skull like an eggshell and throwing him backward to the opposite side of the vessel. Margaret lay in her seat in a dead faint. Dorothy and Duquesne looked at each other in the feeble light of the torch. To the girl's amazement, the man was as calm as though he was safe in his own house, and she made a determined effort to hold herself together. What next, Dr. Duquesne? I don't know. We have a couple of days yet. At least, I'll have to study a while. In that time, Dick will find us, I know. Even if they do find us in time, which I doubt, what good will it do? It simply means that they will go with us instead of saving us, for of course they can't pull away, since we couldn't. I hope they don't find us, but locate this star in time to keep away from it." "Why?" she gasped. "You have been planning to kill both of them. I should think you would be delighted to take them with us." "Far from it. Please try to be logical. I intended to remove them because they stood in the way of my developing this new metal. If I am to be out of the way, and frankly I see very little chance of getting out of this, I hope that Seaton goes ahead with it. It is the greatest discovery the world has ever known, and if both Seaton and I, the only two men in the world who know how to handle it, drop out, it will be lost for perhaps hundreds of years. If Dick's finding us means that he must go too, of course I hope that he won't find us, but I don't believe that. I simply know that he could get us away from here." She continued more slowly, almost speaking to herself, her heart sinking with her voice. "He is following us, and he won't stop, even if he does see this dead star and knows that he can't get away. We will die together. There's no denying the fact that our situation is critical, but you know a man isn't dead until after his heart stops beating. We have 2 whole days yet, and in that time I can probably dope out some way of getting away from here." "I hope so," she replied, keeping her voice from breaking only by a great effort. "But go ahead with your doping. I'm worn out." She drew herself down upon one of the seats and stared at the ceiling, fighting to restrain an almost overpowering impulse to scream. Thus the hours wore by, Perkins dead, Margaret still unconscious, Dorothy lying in her seat, her thoughts a formless prayer, buoyed up only by her faith in God and in her lover, Duquesne self-possessed, smoking innumerable cigarettes, his keen mind grappling with its most desperate problem, grimly fighting until the very last instant of life, while the powerless space car fell with an appalling velocity, faster and faster, falling toward that cold and desolate monster of the heaven. Chapter 10. The Rescue. Seaton and Crane drove the Skylark in the direction indicated by the unwavering object compass, with the greatest acceleration they could stand, each man taking a 12-hour watch at the instrument board. Now, indeed, did the Skylark justify the faith of her builders, and the 2 inventors, with an exultant certainty of their success, flew out beyond man's wildest imaginings. Had it not been for the haunting fear for Dorothy's safety, the journey would have been one of pure triumph, and even that anxiety did not prevent a profound joy in the enterprise. If that misguided mutt thinks he can pull off a stunt like that and get away with it, he's got another think coming, asserted Seaton after making a reading on the other car after several days of the flight. He went off half-cocked this time, for sure, and we've got him foul. We'd better put on some negative pretty soon, hadn't we, Mart? Only a little over 100 light-years now. Crane nodded agreement, and Seaton continued. It'll take as long to stop, of course, as it has taken to get out here, and if we ram them, good night! Let's figure it out as nearly as we can. They calculated their own speed and that of the other vessel, as shown by the various readings taken, and applied just enough negative acceleration to slow the Skylark down to the speed of the other space car when they should come up with it. They smiled at each other in recognition of the perfect working of the mechanism when the huge vessel had spun with a sickening lurch through a complete half-circle the instant the power was reversed. Each knew that they were actually traveling in a direction that to them seemed down, but with a constantly diminishing velocity, even though they seemed to be still going up with an increasing speed. Until nearly the end of the calculated time, the 2 took turns as before, but as the time of meeting drew near, both men were on the alert, taking readings on the object compass every few minutes. Finally, Crane announced, "We are almost on them, Dick. They are so close that it is almost impossible to time the needle less than 10,000 miles. Seaton gradually increased the retarding force until the needle showed that they were very close to the other vessel and maintaining a constant distance from it. He then shut off the power, and both men hurried to the bottom window to search for the fleeing ship with their powerful night glasses. They looked at each other in amazement as they felt themselves falling almost directly downward with an astounding acceleration. "What do you make of it, Dick?" asked Crane calmly, as he brought his glasses to his eyes and stared out into the black heavens, studded with multitudes of brilliant and unfamiliar stars. "I don't make it at all, Mart. By the feel, I should say we were falling towards something that would make our Earth look like a pinhead. I remember now that I noticed that the bus was getting a little out of plumb with the bar all this last watch. I didn't pay much attention to it, as I couldn't see anything out of the way. Nothing but a sun could be big enough to raise all this disturbance, and I can't see any close enough to be afraid of, can you? No, and I cannot see the steel space car either. Look sharp." "Of course," Seaton continued to argue as he peered out into the night, "it is theoretically possible that a heavenly body can exist large enough so that it could exert even this much force and still appear no larger than an ordinary star, but I don't believe it is probable. Give me 3 or 4 minutes of visual angle and I'll believe anything. But none of these stars are big enough to have any visual angle at all. Furthermore, there is at least half a degree of visual angle," broke in his friend intensely. "Just to the left of that constellation that looks so much like a question mark. It is not bright, but dark, like a very dark moon, barely perceptible." Seaton pointed his glass eagerly in the direction indicated. "Great cat!" he ejaculated. "I'll say that's some moon. Wouldn't that rattle your slats? And there's Duquesne's bus, too, on the right edge. Get it?" As they stood up, Seaton's mood turned to one of deadly earnestness, and a grave look came over Crane's face as the seriousness of their situation dawned upon them. Trained mathematicians both, they knew instantly that that unknown world was of inconceivable mass, and that their chance of escape was none too good, even should they abandon the other craft to its fate. Seaton stared at Crane, his fists clenched and drops of perspiration standing on his forehead. Suddenly, with agony in his eyes and in his voice, he spoke. "Mighty slim chance of getting away if we go through with it, old man. Hate like the devil. Have no right to ask you to throw yourself away. Enough of that, Dick. You had nothing to do with my coming. You could not have kept me away. We will see it through." Their hands met in a fierce clasp, broken by Seaton as he jumped to the levers with an intense, "Well, let's get busy." In a few minutes they had reduced the distance until they could plainly see the other vessel, a small black circle against the faintly luminous disk. As it leaped into clear relief in the beam of his powerful searchlight, Seaton focused the great attractor upon the fugitive car and threw in the lever which released the full force of that mighty magnet, while Crane attracted the attention of the vessel's occupants by means of a momentary burst of solid machine-gun bullets, which he knew would glance harmlessly off the steel hull. After an interminable silence, Duquesne drew himself out of his seat. He took a long inhalation, deposited the butt of his cigarette carefully in his ashtray, and made his way to his room. He returned with 3 heavy fur suits provided with air helmets, 2 of which he handed to the girls, who were huddled in a seat with their arms around each other. These suits were the armor designed by Crane for use in exploring the vacuum and the intense cold of dead worlds. Airtight, braced with fine steel netting and supplied with air at normal pressure from small tanks by automatic valves, they made their wearers independent of surrounding conditions of pressure and temperature. "The next thing to do," Duquesne stated calmly, "is to get the copper off the outside of the ship. That is the last resort, as it robs us of our only safeguard against meteorites. But this is the time for last resort measures. I'm going after that copper. Put these suits on, as our air will leave as soon as I open the door, and practically an absolute vacuum and equally absolute zero will come in." As he spoke, the ship was enveloped in a blinding glare, and they were thrown flat as the vessel slowed down in its terrific fall. The thought flashed across Duquesne's mind that they had already entered the atmosphere of that monster globe and were being slowed down and set afire by its friction, but he dismissed it as quickly as it had come. The light in that case would be the green of copper, not this bluish white. His next thought was that there had been a collision of meteors in the neighborhood, and that their retardation was due to the outer coating. While these thoughts were flickering through his mind, they heard an insistent metallic tapping, which Duquesne recognized instantly. "A machine gun!" he blurted in amazement. "How in—" "It's Dick!" screamed Dorothy with flashing eyes. "He's found us, just as I knew he would. You couldn't beat Dick and Martin in 1,000 years!" The tension under which they had been laboring so long suddenly released. The two girls locked their arms around each other in a half-hysterical outburst of relief. Margaret's meaningless words and Dorothy's incoherent praises of her lover and Crane mingled with their racking sobs as each fought to recover self-possession. Duquesne had instantly mounted to the upper window. Throwing back the cover, he flashed his torch rapidly. The glare of the searchlight was snuffed out, and he saw a flashing light spell out in dots and dashes. "Can you read Morse?" "Yes," he signaled back. "Power gone, drifting into—" "We know it. Will you resist?" "No." "Have you fur pressure suits?" "Yes." "Put them on. Shut off your outer coating. We'll touch so your upper door against our lower. Open. Transfer quick." "Okay." Hastily returning to the main compartment, he briefly informed the girls as to what had happened. All three donned the suits and stationed themselves at the upper opening. Rapidly, but with unerring precision, the two ships were brought into place and held together by the attractor. As the doors were opened, there was a screaming hiss as the air of the vessels escaped through the narrow crack between them. The passengers saw the moisture in the air turn into snow, and saw the air itself first liquefy and then freeze into a solid coating upon the metal around the orifices at the touch of the frightful cold outside. The absolute zero of interstellar space, about 460 degrees below zero in the everyday scale of temperature. The moisture of their breath condensed upon the inside of the double glasses of their helmets, rendering sight useless. Illustration? Duquesne seized her and tossed her lightly through the doorway in such a manner that she would not touch the metal, which would have frozen instantly anything coming into contact with it. Dorothy pushed the other girl ahead of her. Duquesne seized her and tossed her lightly through the doorway in such a manner that she would not touch the metal, which would have frozen instantly anything coming into contact with it. Seaton was waiting. Feeling a woman's slender form in his arms, he crushed her to him in a mighty embrace, and was astonished to feel movements of resistance, and to hear a strange, girlish voice cry out, "Don't! It's me! Dorothy's next!" Releasing her abruptly, he passed her on to Martin and turned just in time to catch his sweetheart, who, knowing that he would be there and recognizing his powerful arms at the first touch, returned his embrace with a fierce intensity which even he had never suspected that she could exert. They stood motionless, locked in each other's arms, while Duquesne dove through the opening and snapped the door shut behind him. The air pressure and temperature back to normal, the cumbersome suits were hastily removed, and Seaton's lips met Dorothy's in a long, clinging caress. Duquesne's cold, incisive voice broke the silence. "Every second counts. I would suggest that we go somewhere." "Just a minute," snapped Crane. "Dick, what shall we do with this murderer?" Seaton had forgotten Duquesne utterly in the joy of holding his sweetheart in his arms, but at his friend's words he faced about, and his face grew stern. "By rights, we ought to chuck him back into his own tub and let him go to the devil," he said savagely, doubling his fists and turning swiftly. "No, no, Dick," remonstrated Dorothy, seizing his arm. "He treated us very well and saved my life once. Anyway, you mustn't kill him." "No, I suppose not," grudgingly assented her lover, "and I won't either unless he gives me at least half an excuse." "We might iron him to a post," suggested Crane doubtfully. "I think there's a better way," replied Seaton. "He may be able to work his way. His brain hits on all 12, and he's strong as a bull. Our chance of getting back isn't a certainty, as you know." He turned to Duquesne. "I've heard that your word is good. It has never been broken. Will you give your word to act as one of the party, for the good of us all, if we don't iron you?" "Yes, until we get back to the Earth. Provided, of course, that I reserve the right to escape at any time between now and then, if I wish to, and can do so without injuring the vessel or any member of the party in any way." "What did you read on it, Blackie?" asked Seaton. 2 degrees, 1 minute, 12 seconds diameter, replied Duquesne. Altogether too close for comfort. How shall we apply the power? One of us must stay awake, or we'll go on as long as the bars last. You put on 1 notch, then I'll put on 1. We can feel the bus jump with each notch. We'll keep it up until one of us is so far gone that he can't raise the bar. The one that raises last will have to let the ship run for 30 minutes or an hour, then cut down his power. Then the other fellow will revive and cut his off for an observation. How's that? All right. They took their places, and Seaton felt the vessel slow down in its horrible fall as Duquesne threw his liver into the first notch. He responded instantly by advancing his own, and notch after notch the power applied to the ship by the now doubled motor was rapidly increased. The passengers felt their suits envelop them and began to labor for breath. Seaton slowly turned the mixing valve a little with each advance of his lever until pure oxygen flowed through the pipes. The power levers had moved scarcely half of their range, yet minutes now intervened between each advance instead of seconds, as at the start. As each of the 2 men was determined that he would make the last advance, the duel continued longer than either would have thought possible. Seaton made what he thought his final effort and waited, only to feel, after a few minutes, the upward surge telling him that Duquesne was still able to move his lever. His brain reeled. His arm seemed paralyzed by its own enormous weight, and felt as though it, the rolling table upon which it rested, and the supporting framework were so immovably welded together that it was impossible to move it even the quarter-inch necessary to operate the ratchet lever. He could not move his body, which was oppressed by a sickening weight. His utmost efforts to breathe forced only a little of the life-giving oxygen into his lungs, which smarted painfully at the touch of the undiluted gas, and he felt that he could not long retain consciousness under such conditions. Nevertheless, he summoned all his strength and advanced the lever 1 more notch. He stared at the clock face above his head, knowing that if Duquesne could advance his lever again, he would lose consciousness and be beaten. Minute after minute went by, however, and the acceleration of the ship remained constant. Seaton, knowing that he was in sole control of the power plant, fought to retain possession of his faculties, while the hands of the clock told off the interminable minutes. After an eternity of time, an hour had passed, and Seaton attempted to cut down his power, only to find with horror that the long strain had so weakened him that he could not reverse the ratchet. He was still able, however, to give the lever the backward jerk which disconnected the wires completely, and the safety straps creaked with the sudden stress, half the power instantly shut off. The suddenly released springs tried to hurl 5 bodies against the ceiling. After a few minutes, Duquesne revived and slowly cut off his power. To the dismay of both men, they were again falling. Duquesne hurried to the lower window to make the observation, remarking, "You're a better man than I am, Gunga Din." "Only because you're so badly bunged up. 1 more notch would have got my goat," replied Seaton frankly, as he made his way to Dorothy's side. He noticed as he reached her that Crane had removed his helmet and was approaching the other girl. By the time Duquesne had finished the observation, the other passengers had completely recovered, apparently none the worse for their experience. "Did we gain anything?" asked Seaton eagerly. "I make it 2, 4, 13. We've lost about 2 minutes of arc. How much power did we have on?" "A little over half, 32 points out of 60 possible." "We were still falling pretty fast. We'll have to put on everything we've got. Since neither of us can put it on, we'll have to rig up an automatic feed. It'll take time, but it's the only way." "The automatic control is already there," put in Crane, forestalling Seaton's explanation. "The only question is whether we will live through it, and that is not really a question, since certain death is the only alternative. We must do it." "We sure must," answered Seaton soberly. Dorothy gravely nodded assent. "What do you fellows think of a little plus pressure on the oxygen?" asked Seaton. "I think it would help a lot." "I think it's a good idea," said Duquesne, and Crane added, 4 or 5 inches of water will be about all the pressure we can stand. Any more might burn our lungs too badly." The pressure apparatus was quickly arranged, and the motors filled to capacity with reserve bars, enough to last 72 hours. The scientists having decided that they must risk everything on one trial and put in enough, if possible, to pull them clear out of the influence of this center of attraction, as the time lost in slowing up to change bars might well mean the difference between success and failure. Where they might lie at the end of the wild dash for safety, how they were to retrace their way with their depleted supply of copper, what other dangers of dead star, planet, or sun lay in their path. All these were terrifying questions that had to be ignored. Duquesne was the only member of the party who actually felt any calmness, the quiet of the others expressing their courage in facing fear. Life seemed very sweet and desirable to them, the distant Earth, a very paradise. Through Dorothy's mind flashed the visions she had built up during long, sweet hours, visions of a long life with Seaton. As she breathed an inaudible prayer, she glanced up and saw Seaton standing beside her, gazing down upon her with his very soul in his eyes. Never would she forget the expression upon his face. Even in that crucial hour, his great love for her overshadowed every other feeling, and no thought of self was in his mind. His care was all for her. There was a long farewell caress. Both knew that it might be goodbye, but both were silent as the violet eyes and the grey looked into each other's depths and conveyed messages far beyond the power of words. Once more he adjusted her helmet and strapped her into place. As Crane had in the meantime cared for the other girl, the men again took their places, and Seaton started the motor, which would automatically advance the speed levers, one notch every 5 seconds, until the full power of both motors was exerted. As the power was increased, he turned the valve as before, until the helmets were filled with pure oxygen under a pressure of 5 inches of water. Margaret Spencer, weakened by her imprisonment, was the first to lose consciousness, and soon afterward Dorothy felt her senses leave her. A half-minute, in the course of which 6 mighty surges were felt, as more of the power of the doubled motor was released, and Crane had gone, calmly analyzing his sensations to the last. After a time, Duquesne also lapsed into unconsciousness, making no particular effort to avoid it, as he knew that the involuntary muscles would function quite as well without the direction of the will. Seaton, although he knew it was useless, fought to keep his senses as long as possible, counting the impulses he felt as the levers were advanced. 32. He felt exactly as he had before, when he had advanced the lever for the last time. 33. A giant hand shut off his breath completely, though he was fighting to his utmost for air. An intolerable weight rested upon his eyeballs, forcing them backward into his head. The universe whirled about him in dizzy circles. Orange and black and green stars flashed before his bursting eyes. 34. The stars became more brilliant and of more variegated colors, and a giant pen dipped in fire was writing equations and mathematico-chemical symbols upon his quivering brain. He joined the circling universe, which he had hitherto kept away from him by main strength, and whirled about his own body, tracing a logarithmic spiral with infinite velocity, leaving his body an infinite distance behind. 35. The stars and the fiery pen exploded in a wild coruscation of searing, blinding light, and he plunged from his spiral into a black abyss. In spite of the terrific stress put upon the machine, every part functioned perfectly, and soon after Seaton had lost consciousness, the vessel began to draw away from the sinister globe. Slowly at first, faster and faster, as more and more of the almost unlimited power of the mighty motor was released. Soon the levers were out to the last notch, and the machine was exerting its maximum effort. 1 hour, and an observer upon the Skylark would have seen that the apparent size of the massive unknown world was rapidly decreasing. 20 hours, and it was so far away as to be invisible, though its effect was still great. 40 hours, and the effect was slight. 60 hours, and the Skylark was out of range of the slightest measurable force of the monster it had left. Hurtled onward by the inconceivable power of the unleashed copper demon in its center, the Skylark flew through the infinite reaches of interstellar space with an unthinkable, almost incalculable velocity. beside which the velocity of light was as that of a snail to that of a rifle bullet, a velocity augmented every second by a quantity almost double that of light itself.